Hello, I'm Kelly Blincoe from the University of Auckland. Thanks so much to the organizers for inviting me to give this talk. I'm going to share some findings on developer perceptions of software code review, which is a common software engineering practice. And I hope to use this example to discuss how we need to possibly reimagine software engineering practices to place DEI at the center of software engineering and research software engineering more specifically. So first, software engineering is a socio-technical activity. So this means that software engineers need to work together and collaboratively in order to create large software systems. There's been a huge body of work that studied the social and human aspects of software engineering. More recently, these studies have begun to look beyond just when software engineers are coordinating or sharing knowledge to how they do this, through studies of sentiment and emotion and politeness in technical conversations. So just to briefly highlight some of the research in this area, research has found that there's negative sentiment and emotion in software engineering technical conversations. Of course, negative sentiment is not always indicative of unhealthy communication. There can just be some healthy disagreements. But there has been research that has found discrimination, profanity, insults, and toxic discussions in software engineering discussions and communications. And there's also been reports out of the software engineering industry that the industry itself can be discriminatory and can be a toxic place to work. So these are just a few news articles that are highlighting this culture of a toxic and negative culture. Now I'm going to focus particularly on one software engineering practice, which is software code review. And this is where you get feedback from your peers on the code that you've written. And this brings many known benefits, some of which are improved quality of your code and sharing knowledge across the team. But it can also create a toxic environment. And this tweet by I Am Developer just kind of indicates some of the view of software code review. And the tweet says, code review can be honest, nice, pick one. So it's this kind of belief that if you're going to be honest when you're giving negative feedback in code review, that you can't actually be nice to the person that you're giving the feedback to. And of course, this could create a toxic environment. There's a study recently out of Google that called these negative interpersonal interactions in software code review. They labeled this pushback, and they found that when these negative interactions happened, like personal attacks and harsh or inconsiderate feedback, that it was relatively rare, but when it did happen, it had negative impacts on the people that were involved. And so we did a study that was in line with this, looking at how developers perceived negative feedback in software code review. And we did this by applying a destructive criticism lens. So we looked at the field of applied psychology where this term originated. It's defined as negative feedback, which is both non-specific and inconsiderate. And it's been shown to have negative outcomes in other domains, and these outcomes can vary, and they found that, for example, for women, for some types of tests, that the outcomes can be greater, more negative for women. So we wanted to investigate destructive criticism in software code review, so taking that lens in software code review. We did this through an online questionnaire. So we had some vignette style questions. This is where we wrote hypothetical scenarios and we presented these to the participants, and we kind of explained, imagine you've just submitted some code and you get some feedback on that code. And we gave them either constructive or destructive feedback. And this was randomized so that half of the participants saw the destructive criticism on the first vignette and the other half saw constructive criticism, and then we had another vignette where that was reversed. So every participant saw one destructive condition and one constructive condition. And here's an example of the destructive and constructive criticism. So the destructive condition says, what the heck is this? We don't need a null check here. Whereas the constructive criticism says, you don't need to protect instance of against null pointers. And so after we described these scenarios, we asked participants to imagine the impact of this feedback on their mood, on their motivation, how they would respond to the feedback, the perceived helpfulness, validity, appropriateness of the feedback. We had a mix of Likert scale questions and open-ended questions. We also asked participants how frequently they received and gave destructive criticism, some questions about their general opinions on destructive criticism, and demographic questions. So we could look if there was differences in perceptions across demographics. We had 93 participants, 43 men, 43 women, 3 non-binary, and 4 who did not disclose their gender. Now to briefly go over some of the results. Here you see 2 graphs. One is perceptions of constructive criticism received in the vignette questions, and the other is perceptions of destructive criticism. So you can see here that participants thought that the constructive criticism would help improve their code, that it was valid and appropriate. So the green bars are agreeing with these statements, whereas the gold bars are disagreeing. So you see much more disagreement in the destructive scenario for the participants. And similarly for motivation to continue work, we asked motivation about continue working on the task with the developer and on the project. And the participants for the constructive condition overwhelmingly agreed with these statements that they were motivated to continue, where there was much more disagreement for the destructive condition, and particularly for the destructive condition where we asked about motivation to continue working with the developer who gave the destructive criticism, but also working on that particular task and even on the project in general. And we also asked about frequency that they gave and received non-specific and inconsiderate feedback in software code review. And you see here that participants reported to receive more destructive criticism than they reported to give it. So 55% of participants said that they received non-specific feedback within the last year, at least once, and 22% said that they received inconsiderate feedback in the last year, at least once. So the numbers are much smaller for those that report giving the feedback. Of course, there could be many reasons for that. We also asked them about general opinions of destructive criticism. And so here, a chart again, it's showing 3 different questions. So the first 2 participants predominantly agreed with, and these are, is destructive criticism harmful, and will it produce a negative reaction in the recipient? So participants overwhelmingly agreed with these statements. However, there was conflicting opinion on our final opinion statement, and this one was a bit more nuanced. So it said, when receiving code review comments, I don't mind getting inconsiderate feedback as long as the feedback can help me to improve the code quality. And here participants were much more split, with some agreeing that they don't mind getting inconsiderate feedback and some disagreeing. And we saw similar sentiment come out in our open-ended responses. So some participants explaining that, this is a hack, for example, is not negative at all, and that they would rather have easy to parse and act upon feedback, even if it's harsh and inconsiderate. Whereas other participants wrote comments saying, considerate feedback is really important, and it's important for learning and all sorts of things, and you should never give inconsiderate feedback. So there was a split in the participants and their opinions on this. And then, as I said, we also looked at demographic differences, and this large table of numbers shows 3 ordinal regression models. So we looked at the different demographics that we collected and how they related to the responses to 3 questions. So the first 2 columns show the responses to the destructive criticism is appropriate. And then the next is the motivation to continue working with the developer. And then the last one is that question on not minding getting destructive criticism if it's going to improve the code quality. And here you can see that the statistically significant difference is for women. So women found destructive criticism less appropriate. They were less motivated to work with the developer after receiving it. And they also were less likely to agree that they were fine to get inconsiderate feedback if it was going to improve their code quality. And so in conclusion, destructive criticism and code review has a negative impact. We saw clear differences between constructive criticism and destructive criticism in our vignette questions, but the impact was greater on women. And there's conflicting opinions on destructive criticism in software code review. Some participants advocated writing in considerate feedback because it's easy and it can get your point across faster and it's easier to parse, whereas others were very clear that feedback always needs to be considerate. So I'd like to go back to kind of how can we place DEI in the center of research software engineering? And I think we really do need to re-examine our software engineering practices, and are they fit for purpose for everybody that we want to be involved in software engineering? We need to make sure that everybody can belong and feels included, and we can't have our practices fit for purpose for only a small subset of people that want to engineer software. So I think more research is needed in this area on, the impacts of other software practices and differences across more different diversity facets and intersectionality of diversity facets. So I hope that we can discuss this more and come up with ways to reimagine how we engineer software. And I'd just like to conclude by very quickly thanking my co-authors. So the results that I've shared with you are part of a paper that was written by myself with co-authors Sainuri, Peter, Izzy, Lola, and Emerson. And so thank you to my co-authors, and also thank you to Google for funding this study. Thanks again.